last lecture on SOAP services, of big services. So we are going to go over, let's say, some bits and pieces that are left, and then we'll discuss a little bit about some comparison, if we have time, either today or the next time, about what we have seen so far between REST services and SOAP, let's say, SOAP-based services. So that from next week, we will start with the second part of the course, which is the design part of the services. While, as you know, you know much better than me, in the lab you are doing the engineering part so far. So how can we move this one away? Something like this. So I'm not going to show you again the same picture, but we have covered the messaging problem, we have covered the description problem, and now we tackle one of the last brick, essentially, of this overall architecture of the service, which is the discovery part. And there are essentially many ways to discover web services. One that has been pushed forward by the overall service-oriented architecture framework has been through a service registry. And we will talk in the first part of this lecture about this idea of the service registry, and we will see the conceptual model again and one implementation of this idea of the service registry, which is the UDDI, as we will see. By the way, I have just a question to you. So how would you go out and find a web service if you are interested in one particular web service at the moment? Google it? It seems the most reasonable way of doing it. And as a matter of fact, that's the other big alternatives, okay? There is one which is a kind of institutional or architectural, which is the service registry. But if you ask the people, like you, it doesn't really come out as the first alternative. Nowadays, I mean, this is really a period of time, and I mean, 2000, essentially, in which the search was rising up as a tool. Now, I mean, in 2010, now the searching is the method to find things. If you say find, the only thing that you come into mind to you is Google it, or let's say, let's use one of the most important, most popular web search engine, as Yahoo people are saying when they are referring to Google. So, there are alternatives. The service registries are not the only way, but obviously, if you are in an enterprise, or if you want to do things a little bit more, let's say, carefully or planning, it's a good idea to have a service registry where you register your service. And you can clearly understand that how this works very well, in particular enterprise settings in which you are working in an enterprise, being it either a software enterprise or a company that is using software. You can think, or has an IT department, you can think of having a registry of all the services that you need. So essentially two types of registry, but that's not very important. I mean, document-based, in which, as you can imagine, you are managing all the data into a very flexible format, which is the extensible markup languages, or just a metadata base in which you are just capturing higher level of abstractions. So the overall idea of the services is the last brick in our architecture, and it is the typical, let's say, the basic software-oriented architecture that you have been seeing all over. So you have the service requester, you have the service providers, you know some of the implementations at this level. The idea is to have a third actor in the architecture, which acts as a broker, which is the service registry. And if you follow all the various paths, essentially probably you start from the service provider side. You have a service. You want your service to be used by other people within a company, outside the boundary of the company. And then you register this one on this service registry. And the client who is interested to find the services first query these service registries in various ways, with keywords, with plain text, with parameters, with semantic information. And you receive some discovery results that then you're using in essentially two ways, mainly, into your service-oriented application. What are the two ways? The previous slides was just the words that I was using to describe the diagram. You have essentially two ways to use this service description that are coming from the service registry. And the way that you are going to use it depends on your interest, first of all, and also on the level of description of the service. The most typical way and simple way to use it is at the static level. So in a static design, you are in the design phase of your application. You are searching exactly for a service that will provide you some functionalities that you are needed. And you find it, you examine all the information. Typically, this is done by a human designer, and you make a decision, human designer and programmer. You make a decision, and then you decide to wire it in and incorporate it in your service application, service-oriented application. That's the most, let's say, straightforward task. Is that what is mostly done? There is a second type of application, which is the so-called dynamic service discovery. Dynamic is really very ambitious, because what you are aiming here is that you leave the implementation details, so the endpoint, the parameters, all the implementation details of the service, unbound at design time. And then you know that you are searching for a particular type of services, a stock price, a weather forecast, or something more complicated. And you query during runtime your service repository to find the appropriate services that matches your specification. It is clear, I think, for you that this is a much more complicated and complex task, especially if you want to, as it is, because the idea here is to automate everything. You must have some kind of matching algorithms. You have to rely on these matching algorithms. You have to have a selection criteria, because maybe in the registry there are more than one services. You have to make this decision, and then you have to hope that all the contracts are fulfilled, and then you can run the topics. These are the two big categories of, let's say, types of service discovery. And there is, as we will see, some hybrids of the two which are interested. And at the moment, there is plenty of research, as you can imagine, on the second type. Okay, the first time is trivial. The second type is quite complicated. And this is, let's say, an area in which there is a lot of research going on at the moment. Under various names, semantic web services, semantic discovery, etc. So let's now have an example, very brief. Why brief? Because we are not going to use it in our laboratory, so I want you to know that these things exist and how to eventually use it, but we will not have time to go into the real application of it. Of one example of a service repository, which was essentially proposed quite at the beginning, almost at the same time as the other protocols like SOAP or WSDL. And this system is called UDDI, Universal Description, Discovery and Integration. It's this is you will see it very often also in combination with the typical, let's say, basic service-oriented architecture, which has the SOAP, the WSDL, and UDDI. The reality of this picture is that while SOAP and WSDL are heavily used, UDDI, let's say, is not so popular as the other two protocols. Has not been the same, or let's say that has not had the same success story of the other tools. So I will describe what was the idea of UDDI when it was first proposed. Then we will see what they are, the implementation, the conceptual design very quickly. And then I will discuss a little bit with you the reality of this kind of, particularly UDDI, but in general of this kind of service repository. So the vision of about 10 years ago was this idea that service orientation was going to become an essential part of the software development business, and this is more or less true, but also that it was going to be open in the sense that software companies and various programmers would populate some kind of registries with various types of services. And then there could have been an emerging of a marketplace of these services, like the app store, essentially, of these services. And this would eventually be incorporated by businesses that were going to use these data. The whole picture, it's more or less feasible, but it didn't really go in this way, in the sense that the main problem, I mean, among others problems, has been the business models behind it, essentially, because there are a number of business models for services, pay-per-use, subscription kind of levels, but essentially what has happened is that either the services is free, so there is no big business model behind it, but then these services are not, let's say, very stable, and they're not very reliable, because if they are free, they're not very reliable. Or essentially, the individual enterprises, they have, in fact, moved to a software-oriented architecture model, but within the enterprise boundaries. So they are not, there is not really a very marketplace. I mean, every individual enterprise has developed its own services, and it uses them inside the enterprise. So that's the one of the major problems there. So UDDI started as a registry of web service, not a repository, in the sense that inside the belly of the UDDI, you don't find the services, you just find the description and the pointer to the services. They are not, so that's why it's not a repository, but it's the registry. And is not part of the standard, it is part of the OASIS, which is another open association. And it has an interesting architecture, because essentially it combines the typical information of the old phone books. You might know these definitions. They are typically definitions from Anglo-Saxon world. We do have also, for instance, in Italy, I don't know in your countries, it used to be that for telephone numbers, in order how to find, in this case, real services, real people who are coming to your house and adjusting your heating system or your hydraulic problems, you will have white pages, which are generic information and content information. Then yellow pages, which are typically a subset of the white pages, which cover the complete population. And in the yellow pages, you have essentially categories. You can search for plumbers, you can search for electricians, you can search for these specific things. And then this is something that we have in Italy, white pages and yellow pages. Then something that we don't have, but it's in the Anglo-Saxon world, they have also something which are called green pages. I'm now talking about the similarities with phone numbers, where you have really the technical information. A very similar structure has been used in the UDDI design model, in which you have essentially these three parts. So a different level of granularity, you have description of the service with the contact information of the businesses in this case, with the categories, so you can search for your type of services that you are needed, accounting services, financial services, travel, tourism, and something like this. And then you have the technical information. This is how it looked like in the hierarchy of, with the proper names of the various classes. We are not very much interested in that, but you have the business entity, which are the white pages. You cannot see the color here, unfortunately, but these are the white pages. The business services are the so-called yellow pages, and then you have the binding template, which is the most technical implementation of that particular services. Again, when I say technical implementation, I don't mean the actual code of the service. I just mean the information about how you can use it, where it is. And so essentially you can say something which is very similar. In the majority of cases it is exactly that, the WSDL file, but this WSDL file can be complemented by some more, let's say, semantic information about what is the use of that particular service and what the various parameters means and what they are used to. So you can see, as it is written here, that it is at this level, at the binding template, and in particular in what is so-called the T model, which is the type model, where you have the contact, a very strong contact between UDDI, in particular, this implementation of service registry, and the WSDL, the concrete specification of the service, which is done in the WSDL. So in the WSDL, you might remember that you have the abstract service description, which is all the types, the interface, and the implementation parts, which tell you where it is, what is the kind of protocol that you're using, and essentially you are importing this one. And there are information that are mapped from the WSDL file to the UDDI register at various levels, and in particular, the T model, which is inside the binding template, has all the information, needs to have all the information which are contained in the WSDL file, while other information can be, again, mainly in the binding template. So you see the majority of the WSDL is done in the binding template. So that's much for the model. So we are not going inside to see how it is done. Anyway, it is, as you can imagine, an XML schema. UDDI is based on XML schema, so you could have, you can describe, you can extend it, you can describe everything. And it has a schema, so you can validate against the schema. Usage of UDDI from, let's say, a generic point of view, then we will go and discuss a little bit more in detail the specific users that is done nowadays. But essentially, UDDI has two targets. The two targets are humans and machine. So it is both for human consumption. You can search and find the services that you're interested, and then once you have all the information, you can decide to use it in your application. But it is also, let's say, a second kind of user is machine, so it needs to be machine processable, all the information. It is automatically this way because it's an XML. And not only that, the things that I am addressing here is that there is a number of APIs that are provided to access the registry. So it's not only that you get a dump of your file of the registries, you can have it, but there is also the possibility to go and interact with the registry in specific with specific procedure calls API, like inquire, publish, security, subscription, and replication. So this is the way usually in which you interact with the UDDI, and it's typically the service provider that has the possibility to, through the API, to publish the service and to populate the entry of the UDDI repository, and the service request with the other APIs, which are the inquire and the download API, they can interact with the registry. So again, in the middle, in a nutshell, it's still it is a kind of recursive things in which you have a kind of a service-oriented application of the system. Since you are doing it. So now let's go a little bit on how it is used. Well, it's not very much used. Why? And here is the reference of some literature on this one. Well, the majority is the things that we said before. Typically, if you are searching for something nowadays, you don't go to an official list of things, but you probably use different way. This is not the way that people do business. In the sense that if you want to use a service, you want to know some more information about it, and you can have this information by other people that are recommending it. You want to know, so it's the typical what it says, word of mouth. So you ask around, maybe you just find it because some friends of yours or some other programmer are using a very important service that is very reliable, and you trust them. So the registry in itself is not really probably the most useful thing, although it is an interesting, let's say, component of the architecture. And also the selection criteria, again, if it is really an open world and you have to have a marketplace there, other consideration comes into account, prices, relationships, deals, discounts, and something like this. So as it has been developed, UDDI has not been very much useful in selecting real-life services, but it has had a good, let's say, niche, not market, but niche position on how to use it. And one possibility is really in the service lifecycle management. This is one of the case in which, let's say that you as an enterprise are entering this world of service-oriented architecture or framework, then you have internally the interest of having collection of web services that you are going to use it. And once you have this collection of services, you have what is called lifecycle management, in the sense that during time, some of your application will evolve, some of the services then will evolve, and you need to maybe also take in consideration the internal infrastructure, different services, services that are moved, meaning internally from one endpoint to another. And in this case, a central system like a registry can play really a very important role, as it is in the beginning, a broker or middleman in handling the propagation of these services. So this is one of the application that has been really used. UDDI, because that is an open standard, or internal kind of applications. So you have all your information and registry inserted into it. You have the binding template, so it's a standard way of describing these services. And if the service fails, or if there is some problems, then you query your repository for potential substitutes of these services, probably at the design time in this case. Another application, which is even more interesting, is at runtime. Again, with a little bit of much more, let's say, scope than the previous idea, or the complete open idea, in which you're really searching live at runtime in the open world for a service, and then you connect. Here, it's again a much more limited kind of application. You have your own local repository of services. You collect information. You also have maybe some duplication of this information in the sense that you might have different geographical location, different endpoints, essentially. And then everything is a little bit more under control. And then you can also try to do this kind of things runtime. So for the beginning, you have one particular application service that you're asking, but you can find at the last minute, which is during really the call, the last minute call, which out of, let's say, 5, 10 services, and you know that there are these, the numerability is under your control, you can select which one is the most available, the less heavy at the moment in terms of usage, and so you can select really a runtime.
Are these cases developed in back office? I mean, is the customer, I mean, not seeing actually what is happening behind because maybe he's not able to deal with the UDDI API? So it's basically the developer handling with all these procedures.
Sure. I mean, this kind of details of the discovery of the services, during runtime or during design time is for sure the word of the developer, of the programmer. But also at runtime is transparent to the final user as much as possible, or something like this. In these cases, in these kind of, let's say, scenarios, it is clearly an enterprise scenario in which you have probably the IT department who has taken care of this one, and then you have the final user, the bank clerk, which doesn't care. The important thing is that it works. It works even, and it doesn't matter if it is one service or the other. The important thing is that the infrastructure provides the possibility to exchange live the service during the runtime. So it's for sure it's something that the user, the real final user, let's say, should not see. These are really high level, let's say, implication. So that is the overall picture of this idea in which you are using essentially UDDI again in these two phases, the design time access, in which you are essentially collecting external or internal services, that it's up to you essentially, and in such a way that you can manage the life cycle of these, the evolution of these internal services, or even at runtime access, offering the possibility to, the idea here is to build applications which are much more robust. If one service is not available, you have the possibility to jump to a new one, but you have to know it from the beginning. Okay, so that is all for the part regarding the registry. So the registry will be something that eventually you will see in an enterprise kind of application. What, for our point of view, is going to be the most interesting way is other ways, which is, as you were mentioning before, on the web. And I want to show you just some places, some examples of other approaches, which are approaches essentially meant for the generic public. And if I'm able to go to here I have loaded some of it, and you find it in the slides, the name of them. So Xmethod has been one of the first, of the oldest one that has been around. And it is a repository also here, but it is not so, let's say, automated. And you find various type of information, not particularly, let's say, well organized. This is a very old repository which is there on the web. You have various type of services, both RESTful services and SOAP services. I'm not going to go into the detail of this one. Take a look, and let me say there are not so interesting, let's say, services here. There is a question? Oops. You don't see it. I need to put it on the mirror. Wait a second. Okay, this is it. So that's the X methods, one of the oldest one. Web service list is a nice other, let's say, directory of WSDL and SOAP web services. Here you have more categories. You can, for instance, search for, let's say, content conversion services, online validation, stock quotes. I was searching for the typical address location, which is there. And if you go inside the individual one, you have something which starts to be a kind of a recommendation system. You have users who are rating them, and you can also browse the API. It depends on the various services. This one doesn't seem to work typically. Okay, here it is. Just it takes some while. So you have the information, you have the individual operation, and if you want to go into it takes a while. If you want to go and investigate the individual call, you can do it within this environment. These are two examples of old systems, I would say. There are now some new ones, more or less organized. You will find that some of them are, since these repositories are free, some of them are part of the other, like the programmable web, typically, which is another site, typically has, let's say, crawled all the other available web service from the other sides and are found here. But here you have a little bit more support about the filtering, so you can find, these I think are the most popular ones, Google Maps, Facebook, Flickr, Twitter, you can imagine these are the ones. And then you have maybe some other ones like the newest, or you can filter by popularity and things like that. One thing that I think Chris has already presented to you is in laboratory, did he? He mentioned, he was the one who mentioned it to me. So this is probably the one that we are going to use it. And you see, the fact is that here is not really collecting web services, but it's collecting APIs, more generic, but at the end, the majority of them are going to be REST services, and some of them are going to be SOAP web services. And there are quite a number of them, okay? So here you see the counting of them. The calls. These are not the number of APIs, are the number of calls that are made to the API. So it seems that at least it gives an impression of a live site, and it is really quite interesting to collect something. So we will essentially ask you, we will show you and ask them to use it as a source of application for our projects. And they are, as you can see, it's a very, let's say, Google-like kind of interface in which you have a search and then you start to browse for your APIs. So interesting enough, and I'm going now back to this one. So this is the X method, the web service list, the programmable well, my shape. Interesting enough, every year that I teach this course, there are some websites that appears on this one and then they disappear. So the one that I show you today are the ones which are still there. I checked before coming here. There are a couple of them which were there and which were actually very interesting, but they are not there any longer. And just put it there and you will see it from the things. There was this SIGTA, And the other one was Service Finder, which were very ambitious. They were really providing some kind of semantic search on semantic meanings, that you are really not only looking at the syntax, but you're looking at the essential meaning of that particular service. So you can search it with similarity words and also with more powerful tools. They were all projects funded by European Union, and they produced some of these websites, but then when the fund finished, they disappeared. Interesting enough, Service Finder disappeared. The SIGDA turned out in a company, and now is not any longer a web service engine for open and free, but it is a specific web service engine for tourism in Austria, and it's obviously as a paid service. So they might have found, let's say, a business model for that. So let me just finish this part of the search saying that this part of the web services and of the service-oriented architecture is something, as you might have noticed, that is still not clear, and which is opens a lot of opportunities. I mean, for web developers and also for potential ideas and businesses on this part. And this is the end of this part, which was on the service. So we can take maybe a small break, and then I have a second part on the next stack. Okay? Thank you.